Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2021's Death's Door, the journey of a small crow to collect 3 giant souls and open a giant door to uncover a mystery about the bureaucracy of death.
Following that is the award-winning indie roguelike that builds you up into a master of death, all with the simple control of just the left analog stick. 2022's Vampire Survivors. You know, it seems like there would be something tying these death, maybe just like the embodiment of death, I don't know. But these are both indie games that were first released in 2021. Obviously, Death's Door launched in 2021 as part of our Best of 2021 Top 10 countdown of game soundtracks. And the early access for Vampire Survivors launched in 2021 until the actual 1.0 launched in 2022. But it should be a good episode this week. Really good soundtracks.
I don't think I've actually ever heard the Vampire Survivors soundtrack, so this will be a first for me today.
Yeah, it should be a good time. Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
Well, as of last night, I rolled credits on Story of Seasons: A Wonderful Life. You literally die. You actually die. You kind of just drop dead, too. There's not really a lot of, pomp and circumstance to it.
No, lying in bed with loved ones by your side recounting your journey?
No, it's a black screen while your wife yells at your kid to go get the doctor.
That's sad.
And then it shows your wife and kid. It shows where they went after that. My daughter was a musician and ended up leaving the Valley to go on tour with one of the other residents of the Valley. She ended up being a musician because I married the pianist, so she kind of just had music from the start as a like. Yeah, it was good. It is not like the best game I've ever played. Like, it is, obviously it's a remake of a game that came out in like 2003, and it still, in a lot of ways, feels like it came out in 2003. But I think it might actually be one of my favorite games of the year. I am gonna stream another save file. I don't know when I'm gonna start, but I'm gonna try and stream like 1 season a week and see how long it takes to get to the end, just to see how different the kid turns out. Because I'm kind of interested in that. And other than that, the HoloCure update came out for anybody that knows what I'm talking about, and I've already put like 8 hours into it, because it also got its official Steam release, so it's been great. And that'll come up a bit more later in this episode, actually. So
yeah, very convenient that you mentioned that game of all games. I put a couple hours into Vampire Survivors, so I had a little bit of a taste of it while I was researching this episode, but decided to send back Street Fighter 6. I enjoyed what I needed to of it. I don't need to see the admittedly very good World Tour mode, but I don't need to see the ending of it. And instead, I've put about 10 hours into Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which low-key might be one of the best in the series, especially on a second playthrough. Enjoying it much more than I did the first time I played it, actually, and that's really interesting. Also, my fiance is on a Persona kick, was debating playing Persona 5 Royal again, but I suggested, do you want to try the previous game of 4 Golden? And so she's onto that one, and just beat Kanji's dungeon. So already saved your wife there, Joe.
I personally see after Kanji's dungeon being as when the game stops having like insane difficulty spikes over and over and over again. I don't know what it is with that game. Persona Team is not great at difficulty balance. and I think Persona 4 is the worst example of it. But it levels out after Kanji's Dungeon, I think, so that's good to hear.
Yeah, you get a little bit more under your belt. Having the fox helps. So yeah, it should be interesting to see how that continues. All right, we got some composer follow-up news, just a couple headlines from the game industry as a whole. As the time of this episode's release, if you're checking it out, it's Tuesday the 22nd. Keely's got a Gamescom opening night live thing going on. Probably not too much will be announced there, but just, updates on different games here and there. What did come out of nowhere, though, was the announcement of Everhood Eternity Edition. Talked about Everhood a few months ago at this point, but the Eternity Edition launches on September 28th on Xbox and PlayStation platforms. Chris Nordgren announced it and disclosed that it'll feature new battles with tracks from composers like Chipzel, David Wise, Disaster Piece, Manami Matsumae, and more.
Interesting. I'm glad to see Chipzel in again, because it was kind of a bummer to see her not involved in River City Girls 2.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit. So I'm glad to see her here again. I am not entirely sure if she's been working on another game recently. I imagine she has, and I just haven't heard of it, but good to see her name in there again.
I hope it comes to Game Pass. It seems like it'd be a good Game Pass inclusion.
Meanwhile, speaking of Game Pass, great segue, Firewatch is back on Game Pass. So if you want to walk around the woods and throw some teenagers' radio in the lake like I did, you can go play Firewatch. And if you don't do that, you're playing Firewatch wrong. But also, speaking of Game Pass, Immortality is leaving Game Pass on August 31st. So, hey, you should play Immortality. You listening should play Immortality. Unless you are a child. Don't play Immortality if you are a child.
Especially around your parents.
Very, very much do not play Immortality around your parents if you are a child. Or even if you're not a child, maybe don't do that. But it is still like one of the weirdest games I've ever played. One of the most interesting games I've ever played. And it is 100% a perfect Game Pass game. It's a little sad to see it going. And we're going to be covering it. One of us already has it on the schedule in October.
So you should probably give it a quick check. Yeah, it's not too long of a game. Maybe 5-6 hours. I played it in like one setting.
Depending on how fast you can find the ending. Because it took me maybe 8 to 10.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's true. But I was enraptured with it. Looking forward to talking about that game for sure.
All right. The opposite of immortality is death. So let's talk about Death's Door.
We are on those segues today. Let's go.
So Death's Door was originally released for PC and Xbox on July 20th, 2021, and then a Switch and PlayStation release would happen on November 23rd, 2021. It was developed by Acid Nerve and published by Devolver Digital. Death's Door is an isometric action game where the player controls a small crow with a sword and a bow, and other weapons and magical projectiles are earned as the player progresses. Other weapons such as there's like a hammer or like dual daggers. I personally never really found any of them as good as the sword, but I know that a lot of people would probably disagree with me, and you can switch them at any time. So there's some gameplay options there. The bow, meanwhile, has a limited amount of ammo that can only be replenished by attacking with the sword. And all of your stats can be increased using souls collected from defeating enemies, a la Dark Souls, a very big inspiration for this game. Health can be restored by finding areas around the world to plant seeds, which will then grow into a plant that can bring you back to full HP. Basically, the way it works is you'll find seeds throughout the world, and there are little like plots of soil that you can put the seed in, and once you have planted that seed, anytime you go back to that area for the rest of the game, it'll be a flower that will give you all your health back, which is very useful. Meanwhile, checkpoints come in the form of doors that return you to your afterlife offices, which serve as the hub. I mean, offices quite literally. It's literally an office where crows work. So, in the world of Death's Door, crows serve as reapers that collect souls for the bureaucratic afterlife, and our particularly small crow has been sent to collect the soul of a monster that has refused to willingly pass on. Once the crow has managed to defeat the monster, a much older and larger crow appears and knocks him out, stealing the monster's soul before he can get a hold of it. When our crow catches up with this old crow, he apologizes and says that the soul the small crow is looking for is already gone, having been used to release one of the locks on the titular Death's Door, a door behind which the old crow lost a target of his own long ago. In order to open Death's Door, the small crow is asked to go to 3 areas of the world and collect 3 giant souls from beings that have lived far past their time to die. So the questions are, can our crow collect these giant souls and open Death's Door? Just what else might be hidden behind this great door? And is there something going on in the Reaping Commission headquarters behind the scenes, particularly with the head honcho, the Lord of Doors? This is where I'll ask what are our experiences with Death's Door.
I bought this on Steam at the end of 2021, I believe, when, hearing the soundtrack on our best of 2021, it just seemed like a really good time. It's like, oh yeah, a game I'll get to. And I didn't. Literally just went on my PlayStation app on my phone and secured it now because it is a PlayStation Plus Essential free game this month of August 2023. One of the 3. Got PGA Tour and Dreams. Why didn't they bring Dreams to that sooner? Anyway, go get Death's Door. I really do want to try it. I have not played it. I think having a Souls-inspired isometric adventure game like this, I got burned out a little bit by Tunic, and I feel like it's kind of similar in that way. So maybe I need a little more space from Tunic, but I do want to try Death's Door, and yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about the soundtrack finally.
See, Tunic never grabbed me at all, but Death's Door I did play like the entirety of. And enjoyed it a great deal. I played it back when it came out on the Switch. I did the review for it for Nintendo World Report, and it was one of my favorite soundtracks of the year. Obviously, like you said, it was in our top 10. It was number 7, specifically. I did go look that up. So, it wasn't like in the top 5, but it was still one of the ones that got to be in the full 10. I really, really like this game. I think it is very good. It is a very solid action game. And I'm looking forward to talking about it. By the way, the fact that it is on PlayStation Selects, I put this on the schedule for August before that was announced. So this is another called shot. You're welcome.
We love that synergy and serendipity.
So, I didn't find like a ton of information about the development of Death's Door, though even at work, like I found a couple other tidbits of information today, so I'll be sprinkling those in as we go. But Acid Nerve specifically is a 2-person studio that is based in Manchester and made up of Mark Foster and David Fenn.
UK developed games. Got it. Bam, bam, bam. All right, that's it. That's the one. That's UK developed indie games. Thank you.
There you go. Perfect. Their previous title was 2015's Titan Souls, if you have heard of that, which I have. I've never played it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, I had always heard that, like, the boss battles, they just kind of carried over. Like, Titan Souls, the big thing was the boss battles, and they kind of just brought those over. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Foster served as a programmer, designer, writer, and animator, while Fenn served as producer, designer, composer, and sound designer. Others included in the credits are concept artists Fritz Olsen and Sarah Morris, 3D modeler Juan Abed de la Riva, and writer Graham Goring. So the idea was that they wanted to build on the concepts behind Titan Souls to make a tighter, more advanced game in the same vein. Now the thing is, after making Titan Souls, they actually kind of burnt out for a little bit. but they had already decided on the concept that would become Death's Door before Titan Souls had even been released. That being said, the way they described it, Titan Souls was a game that really, really stuck to its game jam, origins, for better or for worse, because the entire idea behind Titan Souls is that not only do you die in one hit, the bosses also die in one hit, and the puzzle is that you have to find their weak point so that you can hit it and kill them. And they kind of came to the conclusion that, all right, maybe that was too limited, and maybe that, kept our scope too small in the long run. And so they kind of threw a lot of that away and wanted to make a more traditional sort of action game with more traditional bosses. And about halfway through development, the fun of the pandemic started, and the studio began to have to work from home, though they did say this didn't actually impact development all that much, because they had already been working at home, except for right before the pandemic started, when they bought a brand new shiny office, and then to get rid of the brand new shiny office because the pandemic started. So the specific inspirations for Death's Door include Zelda, which you can see in some of the level design, Dark Souls, which you can see in a few things, specifically the way you build up your stats, the fact that when you kill enemies you get souls, though it should be noted, they do talk about the idea of a corpse run, which is when you die you lose all your souls and you have to go back to where you were and get them back, or if you die before you can do that, they're gone forever. And they talked about how, a lot of games sure have been including that lately, and they were a little fatigued by the idea. So, specifically, Death's Door does not have that.
Bless up.
And also, they were inspired by the films of Studio Ghibli, which you can see in the art style and sort of the world design and everything.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the thumbnail for the episode. I mean, that granny-looking character sure is Ghibli-like.
Yep, she is actually one of the specific inspirations that were mentioned that I found, such as she is based on Yubaba from Spirited Away. She is the game's first boss, the Urn Witch. And there's also a character named Pothead, who's a person with a pot for a head, and he is a minor NPC that is a direct homage to Siegmeyer from Dark Souls, the Onion Knight Man. Death's Door reviewed well upon release. Its lowest Metacritic is 85 on PC, with its highest being 89 on the Switch. Praise was given to the game's well-balanced difficulty. It feels challenging while not feeling overly punishing. And it's described in a couple of reviews as a Souls game with a much gentler learning curve, basically. It was also praised for its relatively short playtime. The game's maybe 8 to 10 hours long, if I had to take a guess, maybe 11. It's those 3 areas and then the final boss, and that is the game. And the soundtrack also gained a lot of praise. Again, number 7 on our best of 2021. I do want to point out that we don't usually see a game praised for its short runtime. Usually reviews, maybe it's because usually when we see that, it's talking about older games. But usually reviews get upset when the game is short.
I mean, it's nice to know when they don't want to overstay their welcome. That's for sure. What did you give it in your Nintendo World Report review?
I gave it a 9. I very much liked this game quite a bit.
So right in line with the average, just about. Yeah, nice.
It won Best Game Feel at the Indie Live Expo and Best Indie Game at the Golden Joysticks, and also Narrative Innovation of the Year at the MCV/Develop Awards, which is another awards show I've never heard of. Always at least one more, huh? But it was nominated for a lot of stuff. It's an entire paragraph on Wikipedia of just the stuff it was nominated for. If I list them all here, we're going to be here all night. But most of them were categories like Best Action Game or Best Indie Game and stuff like that. So if you really want to see what this game was nominated for throughout awards season, Wikipedia's got you covered. The composer is a man by the name of David Fenn, whom we've already mentioned a few times because he is also one of the two main developers. And I couldn't find a lot of info on him, which I'm not super crazy surprised about by the end of the day. Mostly because I think he might see himself as a game dev before a composer. He doesn't really have a website as far as I can tell. You can find him on Twitter at AutoTwitch. That's all one word. And his discography is mostly games, like smaller indie games. There's a game called Alien Hallway. It's got a game called Leave Me Alone, which is great. Telepaint, and then obviously Titan Souls. He did the soundtrack for Moonlighter, and then Death's Door is his most recent thing.
I've heard good things about Moonlighter. I didn't know he was behind that. Huh.
I also did not know until I was doing this research. But you can buy almost all of these soundtracks, Death's Door included, at davidfennmusic.bandcamp.com. So make sure you look into that. If you like this soundtrack, you should buy the game, but also maybe think about buying the soundtrack itself. And same for like the historical development research just on the soundtrack itself. Didn't find a ton of information. One of the interviews I found did have a quote about it, and this is the only quote that was talking about because when you're talking to the developer, you're going to ask about the game in general, and the soundtrack's going to be sort of a side thing. It's not like you're interviewing him specifically as the composer of the game, right? Like, I kind of get that. But the one quote I did find from Fenn about the soundtrack is that, quote, "A lot of the core mood of the soundtrack and the distinctive atmosphere of the game we've had since the very first prototype." So they basically knew what they were going for from minute one, essentially. All right. This soundtrack rules. It's really, really good. And let's listen to what it sounds like. This is the 5 critical tracks. We're going to start with critical track number 1. This is Lost Cemetery. The Lost Cemetery is the first major area of the game. It's kind of a secondary hub. It's basically the area that branches out into the 3 other areas. So I would still consider the office the hub, because it's where you go to like level up and stuff, but for the most part, like, the Lost Cemetery is more of a hub, I guess. But this is a song you will hear because you come back to this area over and over again, and honestly, it has this very sort of mellow feel to it, I guess, is what I'd say. It feels very graveyard-y. Like, it's kind of sad, but, like, in a fantastical way. I don't know what I'm talking about or how I'm describing this, but it fits the area perfectly well. And has the tone of what a cemetery should probably sound like in a game like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can also hear the Ghibli influence kind of being worn on their sleeve a little bit. These sweeping strings, the kind of almost wistful and yet playful melody going. And I really like the percussion that comes in. That kind of gives it a little accented texture to it. Yeah, this sets the mood, I think, for this space just right. But
then you take a full, 180 in terms of tone, and that's critical track number 2. This is Avarice. So first of all, this song apparently does not originate in Death's Door, which I did not know until we're doing research for this show. This song originates in Titan Souls. So that's interesting. This version, however, kicks the hell out of the original. This is way, way better, way cooler. So where this plays is in Death's Door. For each dungeon, you get a new sort of projectile spell. They kind of serve as the Zelda-style progression items that you need to complete said dungeons. And in order to get them, you open a treasure chest. The treasure chest then eats you, drops you inside, and you have to fight through a gauntlet of enemies in order to earn that new ability. And this is the song that plays during that gauntlet of enemies. And it is really, really, really hype. And the first time I heard this song was just a moment of, oh man, all right, yeah, no, I'm in. This is awesome. It fits like the sudden stressful situation you're in, because if you die, you got to start the gauntlet over, obviously. That's how things work. But like, yeah, this song is just really, really, really cool, despite being extremely simple. It sticks out to me so hard. It's so good.
It is excellent. I really like and appreciate how with the instruments that are chosen, like you have like the big kind of scope of the orchestration, especially with, you know, some of the deeper percussion going on, but it's that electric guitar melody that gets combined with that to give it a little bit of edge. And I feel like if you really wanted, oh, this is intense, this is hype, you'd have like electric guitar chords and things like that to add to it. No, that's not what you need. I keep your musical style, what you've established, but just add that little wrinkle into it. And that's really neat.
But it is not my favorite song in the game. My favorite song in the game is actually the next song, Critical Track number 3. This is one of the boss themes, being King of the Swamp. So this is the theme for the second major boss. His name is the Frog King. He is easily my favorite character in the game. And also the intro to this song features maybe my favorite joke in the game, which has something to do with his title card. I don't want to like give it away. I don't want to spoil it. I think people should see it for themselves, but I find it to be extremely funny, especially when you go look into it after the fact. That being said, this is my favorite song in the game. I really, really love this song's use of the percussion, and the way that it manages to sort of sound equally threatening and big while also being kind of goofy because it's a giant frog with a mace. Like, you're probably not super taking this guy seriously. Unfortunately, he is also, in my opinion, the easiest boss in the game. Like, way, way, way easy. The only boss I beat in my first try, I'm pretty sure. So this song is not going to play for very long, but just the weight and the pompousness and just the feeling of this song fits really well for this character, and I really, really like this piece a lot.
The percussion is definitely a standout. Also, the instrument that does the can't necessarily place the actual instrument of what that is, but like that's also a nice new inclusion into the overall palette. And yeah, it definitely gives the swampy frog boss feel to it. This is great.
Then we have another area song coming in at critical track number 4. This is The Old Watchtowers. This is actually one of the last areas as you make your way up to the third boss, which you've been climbing a mountain to get to. A lot of snow around, a lot of like ruins of seemingly a fortress that used to be there. In my opinion, this is the most impressive area music in the game. I really, really love the piano part of this song a lot. And the way it just combines with the orchestra and that woodwind just gives it the tone that it really needs. It makes it feel like you are essentially nearing an ending. This is the last giant soul you need to collect. It has to have some sort of like tension to it, I think. I think this place has a really good sense of weight and importance, even though, like, honestly, in terms of gameplay, it's not really different from any of the other areas you've been playing through, but I think this song really gives it some personality and almost gives it a little bit of mystery, honestly.
It's so tastefully done. You're right. The orchestration to go with the piano and the flute and the strings, just so well balanced. Gives me impressions of Nier Automata, which I think is spot on with like trying to represent like the mystery to everything as well. It could have fit easily in there with Keiichi Okabe's work.
I could hear that. And then let's talk about one more boss theme. Critical track number 5 is The Last Lord. This is the music for the final boss, as the name might imply, against the Lord of Doors. Because you're going to go beat up your boss, which is... ain't that something a lot of people wish they could go do?
Office, capitalism, etc.
The main melody of this song is kind of a reprise of what I would consider the game's main sort of leitmotif. We haven't really delved into it a lot because it's not super into a lot of the other songs that we have talked about, but I believe it is part of the main theme of Death's Door, and this is the best version of it, in my opinion. This boss fight's really, really good, but right before it, there is a gauntlet section that I really, really did not like.
Oh, so, boo.
Just know that when you play this game, if you do, there is that section, and it, honestly, I don't like to be mean, sucks. But just know that right after that is waiting a very, very good final boss that I very much enjoyed. So, this song is a very good reason why. Like, this song is a major part of why I enjoy that boss. And it just has this sense of stakes and finality to it. And I really, really, really like the tone of this song in general.
Adding the chorus is always a yes if you're looking to add those final dramatics. And once again, like, they maybe could have gotten away with adding more on the electric guitar, but no, just enough restraint to kind of keep their overall palette and orchestration and textures that they've established so far. But just, yeah, it's placing things just right and just so. That's kind of the impression I get from this soundtrack.
In terms of tracks on the cutting room floor, I have two. One of them, the first one, is here because I heard this song a lot during my playthrough. This is Flooded Fortress. This is one of the areas in the Frog King's domain. I think it's the last area, but I don't remember 100%. I heard the song a lot during my playthrough specifically because near the end of the game, I learned that just starting at the beginning and working your way to the end, killing every single enemy, turned out to be a pretty effective grinding method for just picking up souls to level up before the final boss. So this one sticks out real hard in my mind because I probably heard the whole thing loop about 70 times or something like that. And it's a good thing it's a really good song, because otherwise I would probably be dead.
That's a lot of grinding. Oh my goodness. Always impressive to hear the fluttering flute. I know that's a texture pros can do, but it's just so good, and it gives it that, fresh live performance, live recorded kind of feel. That's so good. I really relate to this. I could hear it in Ori and the Will of the Wisps in particular, more the second game, because that also has a big frog enemy. But yeah, I could hear that in that game for sure.
All I can hear, anybody that's played the game will understand this. All I can think of whenever any of the music from these areas comes out is as you go through areas, the boss that you are on your way to fight will show up and sort of, you're like, hey man, you really don't have to do this, right? You could just leave. You could just leave. But the Frog King specifically, comes out while shouting, "Crooked Crow!" and just shouts threats at you and stuff. And he's a lot of fun. And that's all I think of when I'm thinking of these area songs here. And the other track I have on the cutting room floor, this is The Grey Crow. Man, I wonder why I wanted to highlight this one. People that have listened to this show could never guess. This is the music for a late game boss. Some unfortunate discoveries are made when you finally manage to open Death's Door. I think that this song is a very, very beautiful piano piece that has this really good feeling of despair to it, because despair is exactly what is going on screen during this. And you know me. I like a piano piece. It's good. It's just good.
That is gorgeous. And yeah, I can totally see why it fits just right here on the cutting room floor. Probably not important enough for a critical 5, but definitely has to be mentioned. Wow. Yeah, obviously when you talk about the game's inspirations and you think of the original Dark Souls, late game bosses with this kind of mood fits just right.
Yeah, pretty much. It's very similar to some of the stuff you'll encounter in a Dark Souls game. So what will I never forget about Death's Door? It's just a really solid action game, honestly. The soundtrack, I think, is the thing I like the most, but combat runs really smooth and solid. Bosses are a lot of fun and pretty memorable. I don't think there's any boss that I think is bad. There are some bosses I like a little bit less than others. I think the Urn Witch is a little bit boring, but the Frog King, despite being too easy, is still fun. And the best boss in the game is actually the third major boss, who is also, in my opinion, one of the hardest bosses in the game, but she's a lot of fun to fight. So yeah, if you like action games, this is a game that you should 100% give a shot, because it is a very, very solidly made one.
Death's Door is also on Xbox Game Pass as of time of recording. So I don't know. It gives people a pretty good opportunity if you're a console gamer and you have your respective subscriptions going on. So I don't know if that is any interest to you. Give it a shot for sure.
So for our transition, we like to cover a fan remix, a fan cover, things like that. I said cover twice in that sentence, and I'm just going to roll with it. Of course, I found a piano version of Avarice, and the instant I found that, I couldn't pick anything else. It is by YouTuber Lara6683, I think it translates very, very well. They do a great job. So please enjoy that, and we'll be right back.
Have you heard about a little game called Vampire Survivors? Like, why it won a Game of the Year award and why it's so cheap? I, too, have been curious and, should have covered this game last week, but certain things necessitated me to push it to this week, so now it's time to talk about Vampire Survivors, which released for PC on October 20th, 2022, following an early access period that started in December 2021. It released on Xbox on November 10th, mobile on December 8th, 2022, and it just arrived on Nintendo Switch on August 17th, 2023.
Which, you know who did the review on Nintendo World Report for Vampire Survivors on the Nintendo Switch? Why, none other than our friend Matt.
Oh, we just might be bringing up that review.
Oh boy.
Later on. Oh, here you go. Well, it is also, if you don't want to play it on Nintendo Switch, I mean, sounds like a pretty good place to play, but it is also on Xbox Game Pass, where, if you don't want to pay at most $5 for it, because that's the base asking rate for it on most places where it's sold, sometimes even on sale for $3.74 US.
Yeah, somewhere around $3 is generally where I see it most of the time.
Which, really, really good deal for that game. But if you want to have it just as part of your subscription, go try it on Game Pass. Vampire Survivors is developed and published by Luca Galante, or as he goes by, Poncle. Poncle. Poncle? It could be that. Poncle. You'll see that name everywhere when it comes to this game. Vampire Survivors is a 2D, side-scrolling, shoot-'em-up roguelike. Just try to wrap your head around those terms. You basically have these 2D, 8-bit inspired graphics where you're moving your character on a side-scrolling screen. Basically, this kind of seemingly endlessly generated map that you get to move about. And the trick with Vampire Survivors is the only control input that you need to win the game, essentially, is the left analog stick. You move your character about this world, defeating enemies because the character automatically attacks. And it's usually attacking, certain weapons. It's the closest enemy to you, or you're just attacking a certain area, either in front of you, behind you, whatever. But all you have to worry about is moving yourself about the world. Keep your spacing. Don't pin yourself in a bad spot. Because, your character is automatically attacking while you're fighting these continuous waves of monsters that get more and more difficult. Your goal is to survive this onslaught for as long as possible and unlock additional characters, weapons, and relics for subsequent sessions. As you defeat enemies, you'll move your character about and collect experience gems to then level up and either get new weapons or power-ups, or you can level up existing ones that you already have. You get up to 6 weapons and 6 passive power-ups in your run. You'll then open up treasure chests when you defeat especially powerful enemies to get a lot of coins, along with level up perks. You'll take these coins to then invest in permanent upgrades for future runs, as you usually do for most roguelikes. It is the quintessential one more run game, though if you get good at it, Runs can usually last for about 30 minutes. For me, I was kind of maxing out at about 10 minutes to start out. So it really has that cycle going for you to collect those coins, put in for those permanent perks, and just keep on playing. Not really a game with much story when you consider, past roguelikes that we've covered on the show, like Hades, which is all about the story. Not so much in Vampire Survivors. In rural Italy in 2021, hordes of monsters summoned by the evil Visconte Draculo ravage the land, and the Bel Paese family and other heroic survivors take it upon themselves to hunt down and defeat Draculo. Big question, can you defeat Draculo? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Vampire Survivors?
I love HoloCure. I've not played Vampire Survivors. I own it. It was bought for me like a year ago, and it has been installed on my computer since then. I have not loaded it up a single time. Not out of like a lack of desire, but just I haven't gotten around to it. The HoloCure, one, has a bigger connection to me specifically, and two, has a strafe button. So, a strafe function. So, yeah.
Well, I can see when it also kind of would scratch that sort of gameplay itch that it would kind of do that for you. For me, I had similarly been on the fence where it's like, oh yeah, this is a game I should play. And then, kind of came around to this. Most games, if it were like a big story game, I'm like, I'm not going to make any notable impact into it to really have it affect the research. But I'm like, you know what? Let me get like 2 hours hands-on with it. And I did, and that was worth it. Now it's going to be installed on my Xbox, and I get to go back to it whenever I want, just to kind of roll that slot machine, if you will. How does my draw of item pickups go? Learning about Vampire Survivors was pretty interesting because it is really the efforts of one Luca Poncle Galante. And he's an Italian developer who moved to the UK and began developing Vampire Survivors in 2020, using the Phaser framework as an engine, and he did so while he was unemployed. He wanted to create this game because he wanted to manage a community. They even have a GDC talk, like a postmortem about community management, and this was based on his past experience as being an admin for an Ultima Online server.
Huh, I didn't expect Ultima to come up today, but all right.
Yeah, we talked about Ultima 5 several weeks ago, and here it is for online. The game itself was inspired by Magic Survival, a mobile game that also consisted of a character automatically attacking enemies. Development of the initial early access version took around a year, with Galante spending about £1,100 on assets, art, and music. Now, Galante formerly worked as a developer in the gambling industry.
Ah, there it is.
And so he decided to make a game that used all of the psychological manipulation tactics that make gambling so exciting, minus the risk of crippling addiction and financial ruin. So, yeah, fair. He also knew how to make visually stimulating graphics, especially for those chest bonuses, and you can definitely compare that to slot machines on your big win. When there's cascading coins coming out of a chest, that is very visually satisfying.
Yeah, slot machines are the thing I've heard Vampire Survivors just like compared to more than anything else.
Oh, for sure, and there's definitely a good reason for that. So, Galante decided to release the early access game on itch.io with very little success, and so then he tried Steam before the end of 2021. Unfortunately, he came down with COVID-19 the same day as he released it on Steam. So by the time his attention returned to the game after he focused on rightfully recovering from the illness first, he noticed that the game had been picked up by some YouTubers, and it led to a takeoff in sales. And so he decided to quit his job in February 2022. He hired extra help in March and ported the game to Unity, all to get it out of early access by the end of 2022. Of course, with its success, Vampire Survivors spawned numerous inspired games, particularly, as you've mentioned, a little game called Hollow Cure.
Woo! God, I want to be playing that so bad right now. You have no idea.
I know, I'm hitting all those gambling itches for you, more or less. Also, Vampire Survivors became notable in certain corners of the internet because James Stephanie Sterling is credited as lore keeper, as she wrote for The Bestiary, and she was offered the gig after repeatedly gushing about the game on her podcast, Podquisition. Vampire Survivors reviewed very well, with a Metacritic average of 87 on PC, 95 on Xbox. Something tells me it's maybe not as many reviewers there that got, 95? 91 on iOS, and 86 on Switch. Joe's Smasher Pieces co-host Matt gave it an 8 out of 10 over at Nintendo World Report just recently for the Switch release. And he noted how there's an inherent allure to the numbers go up gameplay, with plenty of unlockables and flashy graphics to keep players invested, but the simplicity of the control also means a simplicity in player agency. I guess you also navigate a menu of 3 options to select your which upgrade do you want, but it's really just all the left analog stick, which keeps it simple, but maybe too simple. There were no hard sales numbers for Vampire Survivors, though it's estimated at over 6 million sold on Steam alone. It was nominated for Best Debut Indie Game at the Game Awards. It was nominated for 4 DICE Awards, and it won Best Action Game while it was nominated for Game of the Year. And it was nominated for 5 BAFTAs, winning Game Design and Best Game. That was a little shocking last year, with God of War Ragnarok and Elden Ring generally cleaning up at most of the big award shows, and then Vampire Survivors comes and wins Best Game. Okay.
Hey, hell yeah. Hell yeah, man.
Pretty awesome. Galante said that is something that he never could have possibly expected. Though he worked more on Vampire Survivors things after release, the game has 2 DLC expansions. Legacy of the Moonspell, which highlights creatures from Japanese folklore, and that released December 2022, and Tides of Foscari, which covers things from fairy tales, and that released April 2023. I didn't cover any of the tracks from the DLC, though it's worth noting that for Tides of Foscari, they actually recorded like a live orchestra for a track, and makes it sound enhanced overall compared to the definitely chip tune, but sometimes crosses like that Genesis line. There's like a blast processing option on the sound if you want, but yeah, the orchestration is a nice touch, but no DLC tracks that we'll talk about here. The recent Switch release, though, coincided with a new feature update that allows for local co-op play for up to 4 players, and that seems to be getting along well. There's also an animated Vampire Survivors television series that was announced in April 2023. It's to be created by Story Kitchen in partnership with Luca Galante. We'll see if that ever comes to fruition, but okay.
I mean, the Castlevania animated art series already exists.
Exactly. Like, you got what you want there, right? We'll see. The composer that we'll highlight this week, his name is Daniele Zandara. And there's not much out there about Daniele Zandara. He had a website at danielezandara.com, but it doesn't seem to load, or at least when I tried looking it up, I don't know. He says that he's a piano teacher when he's not composing music, and you can find him on Twitter, which he only joined in January 2021, which I feel like is awfully late and maybe coincided with the development for the game, but you can find him at DanieleZandara. Daniele Zandara. His discography, well, his Twitter bio just says, among other things, quote, "I accidentally composed some music for Vampire Survivors."
What?
And so he's composed for some short films and a 2015 Italian documentary called Tesori Sepolti. But this is seemingly the first major project of his that has gotten some recognition. And for the soundtrack release of Vampire Survivors, which has everything from the main game and the 2 DLC expansions, the music is composed there by Daniele Zandara, Filippo Vicarelli, and Will Davies. Lorenzo Floro, Elrond 504, and Play on Loop are also listed in the sound and music section of the game's credits. And when you're talking about Vampire Survivors on different interviews or websites and all that, again, you're not going to be talking about the soundtrack necessarily, especially when you're talking to Luca Galante and like this big runaway success. The soundtrack isn't really going to be what's talked about. But listening into it, it's really interesting to note that there are a lot of homages here. Obviously, there's one that's going to be very obvious, and you've already brought it up, but there are a couple more that you might not realize. So let's talk about the 5 critical tracks for Vampire Survivors. And the first track is the one that's going to get drummed into your head starting out. It is Forest Night Fever. This track is composed by Filippo Vicarelli. Literally, the rest of the tracks are composed by Daniele Zandara. And so won't mention that again, but this one is Mr. Vicarelli. And this plays in the Mad Forest, literally where your runs will always start. And so especially as you learn the game, like I did for the first couple hours or so, this might as well just be like the main song of Vampire Survivors. Of course, as you go on more and more and you unlock more things, more characters, more levels as you go to new and new locations, take on bosses, more tracks open themselves up to you. But when you start out the game, if you go give Vampire Survivors a try, this is the one. And it's a good thing it's so immediately catchy, and you could listen to it for 10 minutes more if you want to at a time. Clearly the Castlevania influences are deep. It's not going to be the last time you mention the Castlevania influences, but it's also nice to hear some of the different synths in there that you could hear that could be cranked up for blast processing, a little bit of Mega Drive Genesis inspiration there. Just an earworm of a song. Good electric guitar mixed in there. It's a really nice song, especially as you're just trying to zone out and get into the flow of just move your character, keep the space, find some of those gems. Oh no, don't get trapped.
Specifically, it has a feeling very similar to some of the Smash remixes of Castlevania music.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think it's a lot of the instrumentation feels very similar. Yeah, this song is really, really cool. It is 100%, yeah, an homage to Castlevania music, because the whole game is very clearly inspired in a lot of ways by Castlevania, and there's nothing, I joke about it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's fine. But, like, yeah, you can absolutely hear it in this first song for sure.
Also, with this one track, immediately I'm like, oh, we messed up. This should have at least been an honorable mention last year. I don't know if it would have cracked top 10, but we should have at least had an honorable mention for Vampire Survivors last year. Oops.
In our defense, I don't even think it was an honorable mention. In our defense, as far as I remember, and I guarantee you, right now, upon this playing on Matt's earbuds, he is messaging me, telling me I'm wrong, but we have multiple friends that played a ton of Vampire Survivors last year, and I don't remember a single one of them bringing it up to either of us when we were prepping for the show. So, just saying.
I still think it should have been included. Like, damn, our bad. Number 2 on the Critical 5 for Vampire Survivors. This track is called Reincarnated Echoes. Like I said, going forward, all the tracks we're going to bring up here, they're composed by Daniele Zandara. And this one in particular plays in the Inlaid Library, the second main area that you get to go to. So it's really neat to hear this one kind of lean a little bit more into the 16-bit like synths, and especially that persistent kick of a bass drum. Just sounds really, really good. This one also had a cool story to it. Apparently, the Inlaid Library stage originally had a completely different song called Crazy Escape that, for some reason, it was supposed to be fair use, but it would trigger the DMCA system on YouTube and Twitch.
Woo!
Which would necessitate adding a streamer mode that swapped it out for Reincarnated Echoes. Before they just removed the song entirely, you know what, not worth the hassle, just making Reincarnated Echoes the main song, and yet it's one that's stuck with players a lot. Yeah, not as musically and instrumentally complex as the previous piece, but kind of channels the vibe, especially visually, that the game goes for, and again, you could hear it in a Castlevania for sure.
Yeah, this one feels a lot more like classic Castlevania 2, I think. Like maybe Rondo at the latest. And I like that. That's good. That music is really good, and that's a great place to get some inspiration. That being said, man, YouTube and Twitch need to fix their DMCA system. Oh my god.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're just ruining things at that point. Like, and I'm sure that was just automated, not intended, but still a problem. Number 3 on the Critical 5 stands out for being another kind of homage, and hopefully you'll hear it and pick up on it. This is called Red and Blue. I'll give you a chance listening at home. There is a direct inspiration from a franchise and a character for this game. Can you pick out what franchise it is riffing off of, just from the music alone? Well, Joe, I'm going to show you this character of Pugnala Provola, and I'm sure you've picked up on it, but I think the character design will only emphasize this point. Go on and tell the people what you're seeing here.
It's Bayonetta. It's just Bayonetta. And I was aware of this beforehand because I've heard people talk about how there's a character in Vampire Survivors that's just Bayonetta.
Oh, yeah, shooting guns from hands and feet. And when you can unlock characters with like a password system, if you get to unlock that point, if you type in "fly me to the moon," yeah, that's going to unlock this character. But you can find Pugnala Provola with her character theme here by finding and opening her coffin in the opening area of the Mad Forest. And you know what? You just love a good character homage, like that intensity, starting with that piano, just channels that right away. And good on Daniele Zandara for getting it legally distinct just so.
Yeah, it kind of nails the feeling of a Bayonetta theme, honestly. And man, they weren't, because like the only other thing I know about the characters in Vampire Survivors is the main character. The first character is definitely not Alucard, and that's all I know. It's these two. So I'm glad this one came up. I was not aware that she had a theme that was also just Bayonetta, but I'm glad to hear it because it sounds very good.
Yeah, it's excellent for sure. Definitely a lot of Castlevania early on, but it's a nice surprise to see that there's other influences throughout. We'll get to number 4 on their Critical 5, and this track is called Song of Mana. Nice to hear the acoustic guitar in this one. It's a nice little mix-up for sure. This is the character theme of Popea Pecorina, and she is unlocked by finding and opening her coffin in the dairy plant, which I think is the 3rd level. There's only like 5, I think, and then like some bonus stuff, so kind of in the middle of the journey there. And Popea has red hair. Maybe it's just me, like obviously not as clear of the inspiration, compared to Bayonetta or anything like that. I get Toho vibes from this though. And I wonder if the red hair has something to do with that. Of course, the opposite of a Toho game being the bullet hell, when you're the bullet dealer, so to speak. You're the dealer of death, especially if you're getting this far. You're starting to become pretty powerful.
Maybe it's Toho? I don't know if I hear a ton of... I hear some Toho in the song at the very least, but I don't know. The first thing that came to mind for me was like Vega's theme from Street Fighter.
Sure, yeah.
But I can't think of a specific game that I would say that I can hear a clear homage to. But it's very good. I like the instrumentation in this one. A little bit of Spanish flair is never wasted on me. I dig it a lot.
Yeah, definitely a good one. One that stands out that a lot of people seem to like, and we definitely like that. But to kind of put a bow on things, we'll wrap things up in the Critical 5 with this track, interestingly titled Vampire Survivors. This song plays in Il Molise and also the credits for the game. So kind of musically putting a bow on things if you get to roll credits on Vampire Survivors with a track spelled VEMPAIRSURVAIVOR. It looks really weird, especially if you're seeing that video version on YouTube. Like, did you just spell that right? No, apparently yes. Definitely going a little bit harder into those 16-bit synths, but fleshing out a little bit with some strings and all. Yeah, I I like others who comment on this track, especially the da 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 da. Definitely have some musical PTSD flashbacks to the pizza theme in Spider-Man 2, the old 2004 game, not the upcoming Marvel Spider-Man 2, but
that's what it reminds me of.
Yes. Oh, go look that up if you've heard it in memes and things like that, if that has not caused the PTSD like it just did to Joe. Definitely a song that kind of wraps up the experience. Plenty of great songs in this one, but I feel like to round it out, I had to put this one here.
This is just a minor version of that song. Oh, God. Oh, God. It's good. It works really well, but like, oh, God.
For tracks on the cutting room floor, I have two, and this first one plays in the dairy plant, and it's called Copper Green Intent. Yo, this is just Symphony of the Night. If the team could make an actual Castlevania game next time based on Symphony of the Night, I wonder if they would do a better job than Igarashi. But you know what? Worth a shot, and Zandara is really channeling that for sure. Apparently, the title not only is the music so much like a Castlevania track, but the title is really close to Iron Blue Intention from the Castlevania franchise, which is a music track there. But yeah, this is so much Castlevania, and another big fan favorite. Just could not justify stuffing like another main track from a level into the Critical 5.
Yeah, this is good. This is a very, very, very This is the, like, with the name especially, is the least hidden Castlevania reference and the whole thing.
That's true.
I respect it. It's good. This is a good song.
And the other track here on the cutting room floor is just a great title, but also has some neat things with it. This is called Moms Are Tough.
Oh my God! I know what this is a reference to! Can't believe I know this!
Do enlighten us then, Joe.
This is a reference to Final Fantasy 13!
It sure is.
I did not expect that! That hit me out of left field real hard, alright.
People noting from Final Fantasy 13 2, the song Paradigm Shift. Yep, you're sure right. I guess the title for this song went through a contest for people trying to name it, and Moms Are Tough is the winner, or was the winner.
It's a quote. I believe it's something that Hope's mom says at near the beginning of the first FF13, I think.
I think you're right. And this is the character theme of Ziasunta Bel Paese, which honestly may be the mother of all those at that point. She is unlocked by finding and opening her coffin in the Capella Magna. And this just sounds really good. And just another good reference, another good homage. And we like that a whole lot.
Okay, good. They didn't go that far. Her name is not Lightning in Italian. Genuinely was worried for a second. This is awesome. Like, it sounds very Final Fantasy 13-ish, and Final Fantasy 13 is like the one thing that nobody can complain about in that game, the soundtrack. So
something we were gonna cover at one point and still will in the future.
Hopefully.
What will I never forget about Vampire Survivors? Vampires, though they aren't enemies. Maybe you're a vampire. Aha! And you're surviving against the horde of onslaughts. But yeah, interesting to point out that different places were like, and interestingly, there aren't any vampires as the enemies. I'm like, okay. So you weren't surviving the vampires. Maybe it was you all along. Still, a really catchy game. One that's good for just, spending a little bit of time with it. Do a run or two. Unlock some more things. It goes deep. That well goes so deep. Just looking at all of the unlocks to raise all of the coins for, and just to know, like, I hardly scratched the surface in a couple hours. There is a deep community for this game, and it's still wild to me. Still justified, but wild how it won Best Game at the BAFTAs in last year of all things.
I love HoloQ.
Good talk.
One day I'll probably try this. I think I've told Matt, like, I don't know if I could go to a version of this game without the strafe mechanic. To which Matt responded, that's fair. But eventually I will probably give this game a shot. Don't worry, everybody. I know nobody was actually worried about this, but one day I will bring HoloCure to the show. Not anytime soon. That game's still technically in quote-unquote early access. It hasn't even hit 1.0 yet, so maybe like in a year and a half, I don't know. But one day I will, and then it will be my turn to talk about all the references that I'll barely get because most of them are to the Japanese branch.
I feel that with the strafing. I've definitely had a couple of my runs die from some pinned-in corner nonsense, but you know what? It's my fault. But also, didn't have many good defensive options at the start when you're still trying to build your loadout. All right, well, we found it in the end. UK-developed indie games that first released at some point in some form in 2021 also had COVID impact their development at some point.
To varying degrees.
But yeah, still both excellent soundtracks, and I think makes for a good episode of Original Soundchat. So that will do it for us for this week. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but I said MP3 podcast version that you want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. It's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted, and you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts on catchers all around the globe. From Apple Podcasts to Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes, but we also have a playlist of video game music. Because if we talk about a track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this huge monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Well, Death's Door is on Spotify, but Vampire Survivors is not. So
that surprises me, and we'll at least add a couple of the Death's Door Cutting the Floor tracks, because we already had the main ones added for Best of 2021, so good inclusions all in all. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Give some feedback for us. How are we doing with the episodes? Did we miss anything? Did I pick a bad list for Vampire Survivors? Let us know, and also give us some suggestions for games to cover in the future. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Next week's going to be a little bit odd because it's a type of game I don't think we cover very often for both of us. we're covering basically the same kind of game in a lot of ways. I will be talking about J.J. Ibsen.
You're right about that. I'll be talking about Christopher Tin. All right, to play us out, let's find a cover of that song you're going to hear so much starting out, and that would be Forest Night Fever. The YouTuber Judge Stead Guitar, Judge Stead Guitar, over there on YouTube, did an electric guitar cover and then mixed it in really nicely with the original. He did a really good job covering it. It just gives a nice kind of extra feel to the track overall, and I really liked it. That'll do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.